All right. Welcome once again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to pour white lightning straight onto your brain and hopefully make some complex, nerdy things a little more understandable.
All right. We are going to talk about COVID today at some point. We got to get on that subject because a lot of misinformation about it. Before we do that, we're going to go into censorship in the scientific community because it's not exactly as straightforward as just shutting down a voice. And then after that, we're going to talk about how some of these tools are being used by mainstream media or the powers that be to kind of go along with that general concept we've been pushing forward of dividing the country in order to control
it. But first, I want to pay my respects to Rush Limbaugh, who recently passed. And I've got some things to say that are going to tie into what we've been talking about and what we're going to talk about today. Because personally, he was who got me interested in not just current events, as we used to say, the politics of the day, but political philosophy, because he talked so much about the founders and their inspirations, like John Locke and Edmund Burke, and the men like that, writers like that got me into this idea of where do ideas come from and how do they evolve. But then also just because he was so darn entertaining, especially as a kid, I started listening to him in eighth grade, seventh grade, something like that. When he got on Armed Forces Radio, because at the time I was living in Germany. And it's an interesting story about how that came about, because for anyone who doesn't know, which are something like 90% of the population, when you're overseas, you don't have access to American television and radio. So the Armed Forces, Department of Defense, runs a radio network and a television network where they're given programs that they run without commercials, because they're giving them free of charge, basically. And but they're like 6 months late. And since there's only one network, they cycle through what they show. And every year or two, they run these surveys of what do you want to see? And at the time, Rush Limbaugh had really just started to take off in the early 90s, 93, 94. And they were doing the survey and they left him off the radio side. And so many people wrote his name in that they had to bring his program to Armed Forces Radio. But they only brought in the first hour and they stuck it at 10 p.m. at night. So me and my brother would stay awake past our bedtime on a school night with the radio on low, listening to him before we went to bed. And that's how I got into this. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because there are a whole lot of really just plain gross comments coming from the left. A man has died. You can think he was a jerk, you can think he was wrong, you can think he was boorish and crude, but to celebrate someone's death just because you disagree with them is really gross. The other thing you're seeing a lot is the left-wing sources will mention Rush Limbaugh died today at the age of, I think he was 70. Known for his racist, misogynistic, xenophobic, inflaming commentary, or something to that effect. I think that was one of the New York Times things I saw. And it's really annoying to see stuff like that if you actually know the person. Now, I don't know him personally, obviously, but just from listening to him for years and years, I know he's not that. In the same way that one of my shifts away from being, political in the sense of I'm trying to win a debate to just, hey, can we even have a debate, was as language on Facebook began to become more incendiary, and I started just kind of trying to raise my hand and say, hold on, you realize when you use language like that, you're talking about me, and you know me. We hang out, we game together, we have dinners together, and do you think I'm like that? And so it shouldn't be hard for someone to make this personal and understand why this is so horrible. And you'll notice that when you see all of these ad hominem attacks, you don't see quotations.
Yeah, there's I saw that happening with you, and I kept trying to take you a step back because it's the difference in language. And when you realize what they're saying when they call you racist or a white supremacist and all this stuff, it has a different meaning. And I think that's where I started to change, was I started to see the real meaning of it. Doesn't mean the hurtful things you think. It just creates a picture to take away your credit, to take away your argument. Like you said,
it doesn't mean what I would say like 70% of America thinks it means.
Which is back to our four camps.
Yes.
It's back to our four camps. If you're within 2 or 3, it doesn't mean that, but you believe it. And that's the main change we're trying to make.
Right. So when you see terms like this, if you don't see a significant block of quoted text or a significant chunk of video or audio to support what they're saying, then you should immediately be skeptical. And I have a personal anecdote about this. When I was working on my master's, and I was just reading ludicrous amounts of work, because my stuff was more in the humanities, history, whereas Sam's was more in the technical scientific side, which is what he'll get in today. But there's still some correlations there. And I kept coming across, as I was reading these various historians, and they kept referencing in books and articles someone else who I'm not going to mention because it would be polarizing, but they kept mentioning this book, saying that it was bad because this author had relied on a discredited source. And they kept using that word over and over, that they relied heavily on this particular source, which is discredited. And I kept looking and I kept looking. And if you've ever done real research, you know that what you do is you go, okay, where's the footnote for that? All right. There is no footnote. Okay, so how is it discredited? Or sometimes there would be a footnote, and I go, okay. So then I go to that source and I look and I say, okay, how is this discredited? You don't say, you just reference this person. Okay, well, and you start going backwards, and eventually I just went in a big circle. I could never find an original source explaining why this person was discredited. I finally just ordered the book. I've got it on my bookshelf here. It's a document collection. Now, at the beginning of every chapter, the author gives a prologue that says, here are the documents, here are why they're organized this way, here is why I, the author, think that they are important and significant, and here's what I think they mean based on my particular expertise and analysis of the documents. The only way you can say that a document collection is discredited is if you can show that the documents have either been doctored or have not been faithfully reproduced. And it wasn't like they were typed up, retransmitted. They were just scanned. And I had seen enough, because the university we went to, a lot of people don't know, there are a number of like satellite government document depositories. That this was done back in the Cold War in case DC got nuked. That there would be backups for all of these government documents. So our university library had a huge government document collection. So I had seen a lot of these documents, and I didn't check every single one, but I checked a couple dozen. And everyone, there wasn't a comma out of place. So how do you discredit something if you can't show why? And so you see that the reason this was discredited is because everyone said so. Well, he said so, and he said so, and he said so. That's why it's discredited. Okay, but what's your proof? What's your rationale? Show me how and why. So if you just see someone saying that person's a racist, this person said something xenophobic, okay, where's the proof? Where's the quote?
But you're forgetting an important part of this, though.
Oh yeah.
Someone calls you a racist, and I come in and defend you by proxy. Yeah. He's got white skin. He's defending this other guy I called a racist. Everybody in the audience says, oh, he's a racist too.
And this is how you destroy polite and civil discourse. This is how you get to the point where you can't debate your disagreements. You just have to start burning stuff, literally. I mean, that's what we've been doing the past year now, is just breaking things and burning things because we can't talk about things. And the other uh the other point I wanted to make about Rush that leads into kind of what you're going to talk about specifically here in a minute is uh early on, he was very early, like in the late 90s, he started talking about how everything is being politicized, that you can't talk about anything without it becoming political. And he would point out examples, partly just based on his own stuff, is he couldn't make a cultural commentary without his critics somehow turning it political. And a lot of people thought, oh, that's conspiracy talk, that's craziness, you're being sensationalistic. And where are we now? Where, I mean, that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, is that things that shouldn't be political have become completely political. We can't watch football anymore because it's political.
Yeah. Oh shoot. You got me going in a different direction than I was originally going to go. Uh, let me preface the bring me back to Rush if I start rambling, but
Okay.
there's a cure. There's a cure for all that. And I know you hate it because it's witchcraft, but it's enlightenment values. It's first principles. It's the scientific method. It's starting from the beginning and rationally thinking about things.
Oh, that's not
Taking
witchcraft. The biochemistry is witchcraft.
well, I'm going to get to the technical stuff, but
man.
taking a step back and saying, the first question I ask myself about any decision right now, and this is a life lesson that I've learned from bad experiences. So I'm a person who did things the hard way a lot of times. So if I say something that I learned from life, don't listen just out of I like that guy, but at the same time, a lot of times I've suffered the consequences for it. But the first thing I do in making an important decision now is taking a step back and say, is this something I'm making emotionally, or do I need to think about it longer? And sometimes the answer is you're making it emotionally, but it's cool. We're human. You can go ahead and do that. It's not going to matter whether you're right or wrong on this, because there is no right or wrong. It's a preference thing. And so, okay, cool. I can make an emotional decision. I want steak tonight instead of chicken. Something that's a real minor example, but I want to go to the Grand Canyon instead of stay home and whack it or something. Those are decisions you don't have to go ahead and decide through with a process or whatever. But the other part is, okay, am I going to let these renters in my house without proper checks because it's convenient at the moment and I want to get this process done, or because they actually came across as reputable and supplied they didn't have any red flags or anything like that? That's when I learned the hard way, because there was a situation where I had to rent a house out that we were trying to sell, but we couldn't sell because it was in a bad neighborhood, but we could get renters quick. And someone referred somebody and I said, great, get them in the house. Woo. And 4 months later, checks weren't coming in. And I started getting emails about, oh, my husband left and I'm stuck here with the kids. And it pulled at my heartstrings because, that's the way my mom was. And I kept letting it go. And 4 months without rent. Well, we were living check to check too. So that started to become a foreclosure on the house, and then started a whole long process to get him evicted, because it turned out she was a meth head and was running stuff out of her house and destroyed the place. And we lost about 18 grand on that deal. because I made an emotional decision to push something through because I was excited. And so now it's take a step back. Am I excited right now, or is this a good decision? So there's a method to this madness. And if we go back to those first principles, we can look at things, even if we're looking backwards at something, in a scientific way. Take a social issue. Let's take incarceration rates. Something very big on the critical race radar, and actually for good reason. And we can go back through and look at the pre-civil rights era. Then we can look at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and look at every factor that can contribute to higher incarceration rates for Black Americans. And we can look at those all the way through, and at the end, we might get to policy. And that's part of the systemic racism thing, is policy, right? We might get to policy, and sometimes it's the case. And let's identify that and take care of it. But with the way CRT is going, we're not allowed to do that. Everything is policy, so burn the thing down. A little side note to it, if we went back and did that, you wouldn't have elected Biden, Black America. He is known as the godfather of mass incarceration for a reason. He has had a hand in every major crime bill since at least the early 1980s, but the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And all the stuff that he said he was going to fix in the town hall this last week are all things he did. And he's not going to touch them. But that's my commentary, that last little sentence there. But back to Rush Limbaugh. I want to tie this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I've said my piece, and if you have something to say, go ahead. But then I wanted to comment on your point about Biden, because it's a good one and really ties into what we're talking about here.
Well, my main point on that is if we do things the right way, you can come to the end up with the same conclusion for different reasons, just like we've talked about before with different minds. If you look at all the variables, you start assigning value to those variables. And this is actually a thing. This is part of the scientific method, but it's also a point in that book I recommended a couple episodes ago, Thinking in Bets. No, that was last time.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, Thinking in Bets, Annie Duke, there's the second plug, where you look back at things over time and you assign probability to every variable that's involved. And then you get to the end and you make your decision based on how probable those causes were to the final conclusion. Sometimes you have to eliminate multiple things. Sometimes one thing stands out. Sometimes everything's equal and you're like, wow, shoot, that was bad luck. And if we apply that method, again, sometimes it ends up in policy. CRT doesn't have everything wrong. It's the ideology that's wrong. It's not the analysis of society in general, because there are discrepancies and we need to figure them out. But they're not from the top down, they're from the bottom up. Rush. Oh, Kaepernick. We talked about Kaepernick last time. And one comment I wanted to make, because you brought up all the stats and part of the problem was he wasn't that good and everything. Rush, for people that don't know the story on him with ESPN, he was on ESPN as a commentator, and he made a comment about a man named Donovan McNabb, who was a quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was getting a lot of press that like he was the next great Black quarterback in the league and everything. And the stats, he was good. He was really good. The problem was
I have a problem with that, but
well, he was really good.
Go ahead.
We're putting a hierarchy of good here. He was really good. He was above average. We'll say he was above average, but he wasn't one of the greats. And he was being touted as one of the greats. So Rush made a comment about he wouldn't be getting that press if he wasn't Black. And the truth of that, we could debate all day. I don't think it's a good debate for today because it would distract us. But Rush lost his job over it, and it became a big thing. But my point here is McNabb kept his job. And he played for many more years. He ended up going to a Super Bowl. He was above average. He had a good starting career for about 10 years. I don't have the stats in front of me, but he was a starting quarterback in the NFL for about a decade.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like 10 to
that
12 years. He had a
puts
pretty
you
lengthy career.
Yeah, that puts you in the way above average category. The problem was he wasn't a Warren Moon or my favorite quarterback in history, Randall Cunningham. If you want to bring up great black quarterbacks.
Yep.
But he
that was
also
always
wasn't.
One of the things that annoyed me about him is the way. So what Rush Limbaugh said, I won't say I'm quoting exactly. This is paraphrasing, but I remember this very distinctly because at the time I was watching. This was the ESPN's Sunday Morning Countdown is what he was on, and I was watching it every Sunday morning. And what he said is that you have a quarterback who was good, but not as good as what people were saying, because the media was very desirous and very personally invested in seeing a black quarterback do well. And if you were paying attention to not just watching sports, but paying attention to sports news at the time, Rush was absolutely correct. You could see that. And it's one of the things that drove me crazy about the McNabb situation, because I was a big Warren Moon fan. I was a huge Warren Moon fan as a kid. And I'm like, do you people not remember Warren Moon or Randall Cunningham, who did what McNabb did, but I think better? And they were pretending like, because it was McNabb before Vic. Did he come into the league right before Vic?
They overlapped. Yeah, but
I knew they overlapped
before.
a little bit.
He started before.
But McNabb got a lot of press and a lot of positive press, which annoyed me as a Moon fan, but also because obviously the Eagles and Philadelphia are the most terrible place on the planet.
Well, I have a hatred for Philadelphia, and it's not because I'm a Cowboys fan, because I'm not. It's kind of ridiculous.
It's because they're communists who hate the baby Jesus.
Yeah, we'll go with that. It was my dad's favorite team, my real dad. And that we'll get into the story of that maybe if it's relevant, but because it was his favorite team, it's my least favorite team.
But going back to the Rush story, because the way it ties in here to all this stuff we've been talking about is, if you go back and you actually watch the full clip, watch that whole segment, no one at the time became incensed. No one was offended. And there were, I believe at the time, there were the hosts were Chris Berman, Steve Young, I think was a host at the time. And then there was Jackson, Keyshawn Johnson, and I think a fifth person.
Was it Keyshawn Johnson already? Was he retired already?
Maybe it wasn't Keyshawn. There were two or three black guys there.
I thought Keyshawn played at the same time McNabb did.
Yeah, you're right. I'm trying to remember who the other guy was. Was it the Vikings receiver Carter? Was it him already? Because
Chris Carter. Yeah, he retired.
Yeah, so it was Jackson and Carter and maybe a fifth guy. So there were at least a couple black guys on the set, neither of whom became incensed that he would say that. There were people who disagreed with Rush that he wasn't a great that McNabb wasn't a great quarterback. They thought, no, he's a great quarterback. While Rush was pointing out that you're ignoring the running game and the defense, which was true, but no one was incensed at the comments. No one thought his comments were racist. It was like a week afterwards that the media firestorm started, and then all of a sudden the people on the set said, "Oh yeah, I'm offended by this." You didn't say anything at the time, and you didn't say anything for like days afterwards until the media firestorm started. So this was one of the early instances of cancel culture before cancel culture was even a thing. Because a narrative got created.
Yeah, and the taking things out of context, we're going to get on that after we go through COVID, because we're going to get back to that Time magazine article, and it also has to do with the impeachment trial. But back to Kaepernick, one of the important things is I think it actually played in the movement's favor that he wasn't that good. And I'm almost at this point of watching things happen, I'm almost not sure if that wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
You know, when he got benched, it was do this. And we also got some other data points, like he didn't show up for pro days for some teams and stuff like that when he was complaining about not getting hired and stuff like that. So we've got other data points to go along with this, but the main thing was to spread his message on quote unquote systemic racism and social injustice. And we got an important psychological concept that comes into it. And it's actually called concept creep, where you slowly change the definition of something over time until it's just an accepted fact. So one of the great examples is this idea of harm. So when we were kids, harming somebody was hitting him in the head with a stick, you know, and it had to be a big stick. It couldn't be a little stick, you know. And then later that was called being a bully. And later just saying something mean was harm. And now we've got trigger warnings in school. And if you don't give the proper warning before you bring up a concept like there's a X and Y chromosome, which makes you male and female, that is causing harm to somebody. So that's where the concept of safe space come in. So it's a safe space because they're not going to hear something that would make them emotionally distraught. And so that's concept creep. We get a legitimate thing, and then we expand the definition a little bit, and then we expand the definition a little bit, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and all of a sudden us adults are going, well, shoot, when I was a kid, someone whacked me in the head with a baseball bat, and they might get in trouble, you know?
Right.
And now
and that's one of the reasons we started where we started with this podcast, is because one of the things that is just will make your brain melt if you haven't been paying attention to this stuff is if you hear the phrase words are violence. What? We grew up with sticks and stones may break your bones, and now you're telling me words are violence. That doesn't make any sense if you don't know where these people are coming from. And that's what you're talking about here is we didn't go from sticks and stones to words are violence overnight. That's not something that can happen overnight. There's a progression there. As a political example, and I don't want to get into a debate on gay marriage here, but just think about where we are at culturally when it comes to the acceptance of gay marriage. And remember, people don't seem to remember because of where he's at now, but in 2008, I know for sure, and I think in 2012, Barack Obama wasn't fully on board with gay marriage. He was saying civil unions and other stuff, but you know, marriage is one man, one woman. He was giving the kind of the party line that you had to give to maintain that Christian middle class vote, or what people thought you needed to maintain that Christian middle class vote. And then all of a sudden now it's almost like, well, it's not almost like, nobody really cares, I don't think. And I think you can find polling to back this up, that everyone's like, all right, well, okay, marriage is whatever now.
Well, that
doesn't happen overnight.
I've got a little pushback, but not. You got me on a different track than we were going. So let me form it. It is, but it's not. So we got to be very careful here, because one of the fallacies of logical reasoning and discourse is the slippery slope. And that the argument against gay marriage was the slippery slope. And this is where the adults in the room have to come together and say, okay, let's have a reasonable liberal line to all of this. Because if you don't discuss that line, then you never have progress. But at the same time, if you have progress without discussing that line, bad actors are going to take that progress and run with it. And so we ended up on the other side of the slippery slope with the gay marriage thing, because then now we're in that postmodern era where there is sex is subjective. Gender is subjective, all of these things. So they piggybacked on the success of the Gay Rights Act. The gay rights activists had a point, because I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but being homosexual does have a genetic component. And I've got theories on that aren't probably politically correct either, but at the same time, being homosexual does have a genetic component, and everybody should have equal rights. But at the same time, that does not mean biological facts are debatable. Whether you have male or female genitalia, whether you can be a 6'4" guy with a 9-inch penis playing on a college basketball team for females.
Or you can be a guy who's an MMA fighter and breaking the orbital bones of women because you used to be a man.
Yeah. So that's where we get to a place where discourse is important, and we need to start setting some sort of lines. At least, okay. If we start going past this, we're probably getting to a point of no return. And I think if we stay to those fuzzy lines, the majority of Americans, the majority of people, humans, would say that's cool. But when you don't establish those lines, then the other side can say, well, that's the slippery slope to this.
And here's how I think we get here to this point. So bring up my fun little meme that'll be great and won't get us canceled at all.
Oh no, do you have it?
Because of who the picture it is.
It's on my phone. It's not on my computer. Do you have it?
No, because you texted it to me, so I didn't put it on my phone.
Wow.
So
I text it to myself. Hold on, I might have. Okay, so you keep talking. Let me look for that.
Okay, so going back to something I mentioned earlier about how I started to kind of shift, so to speak, and stopped being interested in politics because I wanted to win the debate or win elections, and I just wanted to be able to say, "Hey, can we just have a debate?" And one of the big triggers for that was this gay marriage debate, because it was around the time of I don't remember which. There were several gay marriage related Supreme Court cases all kind of right together between like 2010, 2013, something like that. And the way the debate was framed in the media and in social media was, if you were against gay marriage, you were a religious bigot. And I'm sitting here saying, hold on a second, here's the link. I listened to or read all of not the briefs, but the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. Scripture was never cited. That's not what people are talking about. Here's a guy who talks about public policy and marriage in particular, and he's not quoting scripture. He's citing, sociology studies and numbers and things. That's not what we're talking about here. And this is what we're talking about here. So for anyone who doesn't recognize that hideous face, this is Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister for the Nazi Party, and he was one of the early Nazis back in the 30s, and he's one of the creeps who helped craft the message that let Hitler come to power. I'm going to kind of go off on a tangent here, but one of the things that made Churchill is that he took Hitler at his word. Basically, everything Hitler was going to do, or everything Hitler did, was spelled out in Mein Kampf. Just you can find a copy of it. Go read it. It will blow your mind knowing what we know now in hindsight and saying, why didn't anyone stop this guy? Well, because no one thought he was serious. And part of that was Goebbels, who kind of took this gross ideology and crafted it in a way that made it palatable for people. And here's how he did that. So The quote here: under no circumstances should the film be made from a medical scientific perspective, but the story should be told in black and white terminology. Otherwise, the people will never be persuaded. So what he's talking about here is
Binaries, binary
exactly.
arguments. Yeah.
And specifically, he's talking about the Nazi T4 program. And this was the kind of the genesis of the Holocaust, because this was in the mid 30s. The Nazis started a program to liquidate undesirables, people with mental problems, mostly people that had some sort of mental problem, mental retardation, physical deformities. These were people that were killed, that were murdered. It was a small scale genocide. And I have personally been to Dachau, which was a concentration camp that eventually became part of the Holocaust, but it started with the T4 program. And what Goebbels is, that is a diary entry from January 1942. He kept a creepy amount of diary entries, and you can find them if you want to creep yourself out. And he was criticizing the director of the T4 program because the director of the T4 program had tried to frame the argument for the liquidation of the mentally and physically infirm in scientific terms. He had tried to use the eugenics arguments and the eugenics terminology from the early 1900s. And what Goebbels is saying there is, you can't do that. You'll just confuse people. You can't let people think. You have to give them a black or white choice. And in logic, we call that a false dichotomy. It's a logical fallacy called a false dichotomy, where you say, well, either you let all of these crazy people and mental deformities run amok and ruin society and kill people and, create giant homeless camps and other kind of horrible things, or we kill them all. Wait a minute. Those can't be the only two choices. Either you're pro-gay marriage or you hate gay people. Hold on. Those aren't the only two choices. And then,
well, that's that plays into, so all these fallacies play into each other. And so we go back to the gay marriage example. The slippery slope to the conservative side, and this is back in the days when I was trying to be conservative because I wanted to fit in with the family I was in, was the slippery slope was, if you allow this, then this is going to happen. And then the next is going to happen. And all of a sudden, people are going to be having anal sex in the middle of the street, And the other slippery slope from the other side, being in two camps, was if you don't allow this, then you're going to allow a hatred to gay people. And then if you allow that, then you're going to allow them to beat gay people just for being gay. And then you're going to allow murdering of gay people and then eventually genocide. So you had slippery slopes going both ways, and those were used politically to further polarize those two camps, basically.
And you could never have a logical debate where two sides, two people, forget sides, just two people who disagree could never come together and say, well, okay, where can we agree? Where can we meet somewhere here in the middle where we can agree that this is either okay or we can live with this, but we don't want to go past this line. But you can't do that if both of those people are saying, it's X or Y, no, it's A or B. You have to get out of that mindset. And there's for anyone who's ever been through therapy, there's a what's called a cognitive distortion called black and white thinking. And that's why that particular quote jumped out at me. Is the way you do this in your own head, the way you create this logical fallacy in your own head, is you see everything or too many things in black or white terms. So it's
okay. It's okay to see the end of a slippery slope, but
yes.
You got to take a step back and say,
yes,
okay, at what point does it go over the edge? And where's that point? Let me talk to somebody, say, hey, there's a point where this could get too far. and I see your end of the side. I see steel man each other. This is where I think you are aware of our side of the slope. So if you steel man each other on that, then you can see that point, and then give them the opportunity to clarify. So no, I see the point a little bit closer. I do see the point a little bit closer, and then you kind of keep negotiating that point until you have a slope like this where we can stay in this valley, but if we teeter over one or the other, it just kind of flies off the edge. But as long as we keep staying here, we can keep going. We can keep undulating,
Yep.
and then hopefully we settle. But
as a non-political example, and I'll make this
everything's
personal.
political.
Well, yeah, I'm sure someone will make this political somehow. But all right, so little clip there because we had to take a short break to make sure my urine was copious and clear so that I could keep drinking my adult beverage. Now my personal non-political example here. The way black and white thinking can affect you personally and kind of mess up your life, or on a small scale. I was the kind of person that didn't want to do anything if there was even a remote chance of failure. So, for instance, I trained
Paralyzed by perfection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I trained and trained and trained and trained. I never got in the ring. I never got in the cage. Because if I couldn't, in my mind, if I wasn't the second coming of Bruce Lee, Boss Rutan, and Hoist Gracie all at once, then I was a failure. Obviously, that's stupid. If you're able to take a breath and take a step back, you realize that's incredibly stupid because all of these guys were freaks of nature when it came to physicality and talent, and they all started somewhere. They didn't start out on top. That's just where we remember them. And so I never got in the ring. I never got in the cage. And then I got injured and couldn't. Whereas Sam just did it and actually has that experience that even if, it did.
My ears are different if you can't tell.
Yes. But, and so even if it, didn't lead to the heights of UFC championships, at least he got to have that experience that I never got to have because I was paralyzed by this false dichotomy that I had set up in my own mind. And then you can see how that's dangerous when it comes to our personal interactions. That, all right, I'm not going to ever ask anyone out because there's a good chance of failure. Are you one of those kinds of people? So where does that leave you? Lonely and frustrated. I'm never going to talk to someone who disagrees with me politically because whatever, because they're a terrible person, because they're a Nazi. Where does that lead us? Another example, a political example I thought of while we're talking about this is, how many times did you see those annoying make Orwell fiction again memes? And how many times did you see it from someone who thought that Trump is literally Hitler and anyone who supports him is literally a Nazi? Okay, hold on. That's what you were talking about, was this slippery slope. Okay. You don't get from here to 1984 overnight. It's okay to say, hey guys, look, if we keep going down this path, this is where we're going to end up. But if you say we're there now, then a lot of people are going to look at you like you're a crazy person, because frankly, you are. You're getting sucked in to this black and white thinking, partly because what we've been talking about, the postmodernism, the critical theory, and that's how arguments are phrased to you purposefully to make you have to choose between this thing that somebody wants you to do and this horrible, terrible thing that they know you're not going to want to do. So,
it's funny because one the main reason I wanted to get all this stuff going is because all these concepts that people don't understand that are happening slowly, piece by piece by piece by piece. Well, part of the strategy is to make it normal over time. So that's how people don't see it coming. And I've talked to people, family especially, because I come from a farming family. We'll call it a farming family, and I'm the only one in my immediate lineage to have a degree of any kind, and I have a postgraduate degree and everything. And it's a different language. Everything's a little bit skewed from reality for one versus the other. So they're both reality, but one is very academic. The language is different. The way you think is different. How you go about things is different. And they didn't understand what I was saying, because I was like, this is happening and this is why. And they're like, you're crazy. And of course they have their camps, because I've got some on the liberal side which are like, oh, Biden is Jesus. And those on the other side, Trump is Jesus squared, where he's better than Jesus. So part of what I wanted to get going was taking that academic discourse, that is where all this started, and bring it to real people. And I know I try to translate on the fly, and one change I'm trying to make here is I'm just going to speak as it was presented, and then we'll clarify after. We'll clarify as it goes on, because I was trying to translate as I was going, and that was part of the
well, and also I
fogginess.
think it's important to hear that original language, that technical language, because people will hear those terms out there.
Yeah, eventually it comes out.
Yes.
Because if I said cisgender a year ago, nobody outside of a humanities department or feminist glaciology program would know what I was saying. But now it's actually showing up in presidential debates and stuff like that. And that's part of that concept creep, making something a little bit more normal over time. It's not the original intention of the term concept creep, because it did have to do with the psychological pathology, but the normalizing of phrases, and this takes us way back to Kaepernick, is how this is all spreading, because we're at a precipice right now, and this is an alarmist statement. We're at a point where the term systemic racism is ceasing to be something everybody hears and becoming something everybody accepts without explanation. So if you said, oh, well, I'm doing this because of systemic racism, about half the population right now say, well, good, how can I help? No questions asked.
Well, it's more than half, because I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head.
Well, it's more than half because we have a new president.
Yeah. And well,
there's evidence.
I can't remember if I mentioned these numbers before in our previous podcast, but if you go back to the beginning of last summer, when the Floyd video first came out, and people were just appalled at that incident, as they should have been.
Yeah.
And it was 70 something. I think it was like 73% of polled Americans supported Black Lives Matter. Not just the idea, but the movement. They supported the movement. And then at the end of the summer, after cities all across the country had been lit on fire, it was down to 20 something, because that's that false dichotomy of Black Lives Matter or you're racist. No, hold on. Let's back up a second and think. And then you actually see what that means. You see what the slogans actually mean in practice to the people who are saying them. And then you think, oh, wait a minute, back to our Goebbels example. He gives you that black and white choice, and then you think, oh, well, I don't want that, so I guess this is okay, even if I don't really agree with it. It's better than the alternative. And then you get to a point where millions of people are being rounded up and slaughtered, and half your family is killed in bombing, and you can't do anything about it. So the farther you go down that road of black and white thinking. Um, the and I love this quote because it's so true. It's true. It's true about lying. Is that yeah? If you do that, it will work.
Well, you
And
look at habitual liars. You look at pathological liars,
uh-huh.
especially when they're narcissistic and they want to believe their own truth. Is they lie so much they believe their own lie.
Exactly.
And they
we,
will do
we all do
anything.
that. Think, just make it personal. Think about how often you have done that to yourself.
You know, there's no good segue here, but we got to get into scientific censorship because it plays into all this. Because we're going to have this exact same discussion, but
Yeah.
we got to put some context to it. And this is where I got to kind of give a little bit of my own expertise.
Yeah, and that's
done.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to start off where we started
Yeah.
off. That's why I wanted to start off where we started off, because it leads into this. It shouldn't matter. That's what I was saying about, that's why we were talking about everything being political, is because we're talking about epidemiology and a pandemic. It shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be a political issue. But what we're going to talk about here is that it 100% is.
Yeah, well, that's everything. Everything's become, as soon as I see it become
Yeah.
political, I know there's going to be no adult discussion. We saw the same thing with the freeze in Texas.
Yeah.
We've got weather we haven't had in over 30 years. We've got a
40,
point,
I think.
1989.
89. Okay.
Yeah. So not that I remember that because I didn't, I was 9 years old, but at the same time, we've got weather we haven't had in about 30 years. And it was very close to being a 150-year event. So it's a situation where the infrastructure got caught with its pants down, and for good reason. If there's a spot in my backyard that I like to go pee when it's night because I don't want to go inside, and all of a sudden there just happens to be somebody walking their dog with their flashlight pointed at me out of nowhere, the worst thing you could do is run right there, because you're just going to trip over your own pants. It's it happens sometimes, and it's not to downplay the bad things that happen of it, because we really did, at least in the Galveston area, we have a high homeless population. Galveston, Houston area, and they were devastated by it. They had to bring in refrigeration trucks to take care of the extra bodies. It was that bad. But as far as suburbia, it's inconveniences. We're just, it's a little bit of power out, a little bit. You got to boil your water. I remember being in the country back as a kid. We had to boil water in a normal situation and heat up with a stove. So inconvenience and the first world problems that have come out of this, and then the media took it off because everybody's, oh, Governor Abbott's a piece of shit, blah blah blah. I'm like, governor really doesn't have a lot to do with power infrastructure. And then the other side is going, well, if you didn't force us to use wind, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, there's truth to both sides, but realistically, it was a 30-year event that we weren't prepared for. And when you have your heat wave up north, we'll try to restrain ourselves at this point. It's
and it matters, and that's what we're going to talk about here with COVID. It matters that there's truth on both sides, and if both sides can't talk to each other rationally, you'll never figure out how much truth is on both sides. So one of the reasons that I used to be politics, win the debate, is because I hated the idea that, well, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I always hated that idea, because in my mind, what people were saying, and I think some people do mean this and they're dumb when they say this, is the parable of Solomon splitting the baby. Is that, okay, well, if you say this and you say this, then we'll just go right down the middle, and that's the truth, and that's where it should be. And that is dumb. And that's what I always envisioned, and why I hated that idea. But then you eventually come to realize, okay, well, no, it doesn't mean right down the center. It just means there's some degree of truth to both sides, and you've got to talk about it. Yeah.
Do it like this.
That's it. Yes.
There's overlapping truth.
And you have to be able to come to that understanding, because take this winter event, take this winter storm. if you don't rationally discuss all the different elements of blame, you can't fix it, because
Mhm.
you'll fix one thing and you'll probably fix it badly, but then these other things won't get fixed. And so you'll still have a problem the next time something like this happens.
I think I'm hearing an echo. Remember when I talked about starting from the beginning and analyzing a problem and taking all the
Yeah.
variables and then putting probabilities on them?
Mhm.
Yeah. So do you want me to get in the numbers part or the process part first?